Sunlight is only in its light and warmth, yet protection is needed when it is too intense. Light is not a very penetrating form of radiation, and even cloth can block it out and so cast a shadow on the skin. Because we can see and feel the sunlight, we know instinctively when to shield ourselves from too much. But sunlight is only one of many kinds of radiation. Just as there is a spectrum of color, there is also a whole spectrum of radiation. All forms of radiation travel through space in the form of waves of different lengths. The white-hot metal sends out both short waves of light and longer waves of heat. As the metal cools, fewer and fewer of the short light waves are emitted, and so the color changes down through the visible spectrum. Finally, only the longer waves of heat are being sent out, waves which we cannot see, but which can be felt as heat. The radio tower sends out waves so much longer than heat that we can neither see nor feel them. Radio waves move through space with the speed of light. Although they are present everywhere, these long waves remain beyond the limits of our senses until they are detected by a sensitive receiving device and translated into sound. Radio waves are more penetrating than light waves, but they too can be blocked out. Radio waves affect only the radio receiver. They are far too long to be seen or felt. Far higher in the spectrum, there is another kind of radiation. Its waves are far too short to be seen or felt. The X-ray tube is the man-made source of this radiation, and its invisible waves can affect photographic film in a manner similar to light. X-rays move through space with the speed of light, but they are far more penetrating than light or heat or radio waves. In the body, only dense matter, like bone, can stop enough X-rays to cast a shadow on the film. X-rays are useful, but they can be hazardous. The body does not feel these rays, but it may be affected by them. Man, like other organisms, is an interdependent community of billions of living cells. X-rays can bring about changes in the substances that make up the cells. These changes may injure or kill some of the cells. If the radiation were intense, many cells would be damaged and the whole organism could be affected. Damage to a random few cells is not likely to injure the body's functions. Because we have some understanding of the nature of this penetrating radiation, we can take steps to shield those exposed. Cloth cannot stop the penetrating X-rays, so special shielding like dense lead and rubber aprons is used to block out the rays. But the X-rays must pass through the body to leave a shadow picture on the film. No exposure can be made without some cell damage. When sickness or injury demand it, the benefits of X-rays, carefully used, far outweigh the risk. When the X-ray machine is shut off, it does not send out any rays. But the meter continues to indicate the presence of a small amount of radiation. It continues to detect what are apparently X-rays. Where then is this radiation coming from? It comes from far out in the universe in the form of cosmic rays which resemble X-rays and which constantly shower the Earth. We live in an eternal sea of radiation. Even ordinary stone and brick normally contain traces of substances like uranium, which also send out rays. This background radiation is a natural part of our environment. It is not a special hazard because it is not very intense. But from rock, uranium can be extracted and concentrated and made to produce intense radioactivity, radiation caused by the controlled disintegration of the atom itself. In the atomic reactor, man has produced radioactivity so intense that he is now able to alter the basic structure of matter itself. Even ordinary substances can be changed to become sources of atomic radiation for use in medicine, industry, and scientific research. Behind many feet of dense shielding, the reactor core seethes with fragments of exploding atoms. These atomic particles can be made to leave vapor trails in a cloud chamber, although they themselves are too small to be seen. As atoms break up, they also release invisible gamma rays, rays which are even more penetrating than X-rays. The small capsule has been bombarded in the reactor for several weeks. It now contains a radioactive substance, in this case, radioactive iodine, and now it too must be heavily shielded. Man cannot see the atoms of radioactive iodine nor feel the radiation which they give off. But he knows the dangers of exposure to atomic radiation, and so protects himself with walls of dense lead brick and remote handling equipment. In each drop of the radioactive iodine, there are millions of atoms emitting bursts of gamma radiation. The iodine is sending out a continuous stream of this invisible radiation, much as a radio tower sends out radio waves. Radioactive substances can be traced by detecting the gamma rays they send out. The atoms of iodine themselves act as tiny radio transmitters. Only a tiny amount of iodine is needed as a tracer, enough to be an adequate source of radiation, but not enough to be a significant hazard. When ordinary iodine is taken into the body, it is absorbed by the two lobes of the thyroid gland in the throat. These lobes absorb radioactive iodine in the same way as they take up ordinary iodine. If we can find out where the iodine concentrates, we can learn much about the condition of the gland. Gamma rays are being sent out by the atoms of radioiodine and detected by a radiation counter. Ray by ray, it charts the location of the iodine in the throat, providing information that would be impossible to get in any other way. One lobe has absorbed iodine normally. The other has not, and it may be diseased. Beyond 3 feet of glass and dense walls of lead and steel are a few ounces of cobalt that has been made intensely radioactive. The cobalt from several capsules is being concentrated into one extremely intense source of radiation, which wisely used can be of immense benefit to man, as when its gamma rays are used to kill cancer. Without this elaborate shielding, this kind of radiation could have disastrous consequences, because uncontrolled exposure to the rays from a single capsule for a few moments would almost certainly result in death. Once a substance has been made radioactive, its rays are like an unquenchable fire. Some substances remain radioactive for a few weeks, others for many centuries. Man cannot turn off this radiation once he has created it. Never before has man entered a new era so elaborately prepared as he is in entering the atomic age. Never have wisdom and knowledge been more necessary, for we are dealing with a force so great that it can change not only the structure of matter, but the very nature of life itself. Sunlight is the form of radiation that makes life flourish on the Earth. Some kinds of radiation, such as radio waves and background radiation, have little or no effect on life. But atomic radiation affects all living things. Every day at the Brookhaven Laboratory on Long Island, plants are exposed to intensive gamma radiation so that man can study its effect on living things. Inside the pipe, radioactive cobalt, the source of the gamma rays, will move up from a lead vault in the ground. Earlier, when they came to work in the field, each person padlocked the mechanism that raises the cobalt source. It cannot be operated until every person has removed his own lock from the mechanism. Only when the last person has removed his lock and the field is known to be clear are the gates of the garden closed. Even at the edge of the field, some radiation can be detected from the gamma ray source hundreds of feet away. Close to the source, the plants survive, although they are exposed to atomic radiation for many hours each day. Vegetable life, like these tobacco plants, can withstand much larger amounts of radiation than can animal life. But these rays affect all kinds of life in the same way, by interfering with the functions of the individual cells from which the organism is formed. In the nucleus of each cell are tiny bodies called chromosomes, which regulate the cell's life. The cell reproduces by dividing, and when it does, duplicate sets of chromosomes are passed on to each new cell. Penetrating radiation, such as gamma rays and X-rays, can interfere with the life of the cell by damaging the chromosomes. Radiation interferes with cell division, and if the cell cannot divide properly, it may die. Cancer cells divide much more rapidly than normal body cells, and so they are much more susceptible to damage by radiation. This is why radiation can be used to destroy cancer in the body. But all growing tissue, cancerous or healthy, can be affected to some degree by radiation. still closer to the gamma ray source, tobacco leaves, normally broad and thick, are so affected that they are almost unrecognizable. Gamma rays, like all other forms of radiation, are most intense nearest the source. Gamma radiation can wither and cause premature aging, and it can cause tumors. By studying the abnormalities caused by radiation, scientists get an insight into the way cells live and reproduce themselves. In gaining new knowledge, we are also beginning to understand how radiation can cripple. And how it can stunt and deform. Plants further from the source do not look injured, but they may be affected in a way that ultimately can have far-reaching consequences. All life on the surface of the Earth continues because each species can reproduce true to its kind. Reproduction begins when the egg cell, which contains the hereditary characteristics of the mother, is fertilized by the sperm cell, which carries those of the father. Together, these sex cells form an organism that develops true to the species of the parents. Penetrating rays can affect the hereditary characteristics contained in the egg or sperm. Even if the damage was done long ago, the new organism may not develop true to its species. Such changes, called mutations, are mostly harmful, and sooner or later they can interfere with the survival of the affected organism. Gamma rays do not make anything radioactive. As soon as the gamma ray source is back in its lead vault below ground, the garden is free of radiation, and the doors to the garden can open. Men can now go safely about their work, where only a few moments earlier, no creature could have gone unharmed.
Look at that.
After many hours of exposure to the unfelt rays of the gamma source, these killdeer eggs may not hatch at all, although they seem normal. Deformed birds may emerge, or birds that appear sound, but whose offspring may be affected in some way.
That's quite a long exposure.
The dense substance of the rock will now shield out many of the rays, but its protection may have come too late. The atomic age can bring immense benefits to mankind. But if we are to enjoy these benefits, we need to shield ourselves from its known dangers and from our own ignorance and carelessness. For we have only begun to understand how atomic radiation can harm not only us, but through us, the generations yet to come.